BRICS. Many describe it as an alternative to the West. But is this really the case? What is this group, and is it as important as some claim? We take a look at BRICS to find out. The name BRICS is actually an acronym for its founding countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Today, however, more countries belong to BRICS. It also includes Egypt, Iran, Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates, and Indonesia, which joined the group in January 2025.
BRICS w przestrzeni medialnej funkcjonuje jako taki zwarty
In the
blok
media space, BRICS functions as a compact bloc of non-Western countries as opposed to Western countries, and I think that's how BRICS wants to be perceived. This is central to the organization. We have a group of countries that are dissatisfied with a variety of issues: the way the international order is today, how it is dominated by the West. They meet on a regular basis. They create some soft institutions, but we have to say that, first of all, there is a lot that divides these states, like their vision of world order or their interests in relation to each other. What they have in common is that they want to have a forum to independently talk to the West, and also to pick up the ball a little bit in the media internationally, showing that they are a fairly compact bloc. Of course, the reality is much more complex, and in fact, BRICS is not an international organization at all. It doesn't even formally have a secretary or office. It's simply a space where more and more of these non-Western interactions are taking place. BRICS countries make up around 37% of global economic output and around 45% of the global population.
Choć grupa skupia w sobie znaczny potencjał.
Although the group has considerable economic and population potential, the low level of economic, legal, institutional, and political integration, as well as the divergent, often completely contradictory interests of the member states, mean that we should speak of BRICS as rather a club of non-Western countries striving to play a greater role on the international stage rather than an actual organization. The Kremlin is using BRICS to build up Russia's image as a global power. Participation in the group is primarily for Moscow's propaganda purposes.
Nadrzędnym celem rosyjskiej polityki
The overriding aim of Russian policy is to dismantle the current international order. Therefore, Moscow seeks to turn BRICS into an anti-Western bloc, at least on the rhetorical level. The gains for Russia from BRICS membership are mainly political and propaganda in nature. Russia is seeking an openly anti-Western course for BRICS, but it is unable to push the concept. This vision is not accepted by India, South Africa, or Brazil. The low level of political, economic, legal, and institutional integration within BRICS and the divergent and even conflicting interests of its members mean that it has limited opportunities for qualitative development, and as such cannot really play the role of a counterweight to the Western world. In the media, BRICS very often comes up in the context of an alternative payment system for international trade. The idea behind it is for the dollar not to be the most important international payment method and currency. This is often referred to as de-dollarization, and it's this issue that represents one of the fundamental differences in the interests of various BRICS countries. It's particularly important for Russia and China to reach a solution that does not rely on the US dollar. The Russians know that the prospects for implementing a new alternative payment system for international trade are slim.
Rosjanie, ale i Chińczycy lubią
The
wpuszczać
Russians, but also the Chinese, like to put these bits of information into the media space, saying that an alternative currency is being created, that it's an alternative to the dollar, that the US financial empire is crumbling. However, if we scrape the surface a little, we see that this is partly wishful thinking. The issue of de-dollarization illustrates, first and foremost, the deep divergence in the interests of the individual BRICS countries.
Najgorętszym tematem oczywiście są
The hottest topics are, of course, international settlement issues and de-dollarization issues, especially after the war in Ukraine. The Russians care about these the most. For them, it's a pressing issue, because they are under economic sanctions. However, if we take a practical look, it turns out that there are many problems with this. First of all, there's the question of how this currency would be constructed when most of the BRICS currencies are, for example, in some way non-convertible or simply pegged to the dollar. BRICS can't be easily compared to structured organizations like the UN, NATO, or the European Union, meaning it's not very institutionalized. Some years ago, a new development bank was created as part of BRICS. with the intention to compete with the World Bank. To date, the new development bank has financed dozens of projects, but it's still a very small institution.
Trudno jest stworzyć
It's difficult to create a currency out of nothing, one that is internationally accepted, underpinned by something real, and yet free to exchange. This is a big problem of internationalization, also of the Chinese yuan, and it translates into all the other BRICS currencies, because in fact, if there were to be some kind of common alternative currency, it could really only be based on the Chinese yuan. Only the Chinese economy, the Chinese financial system, could carry it. We are a long way from that because the Chinese themselves are not quite ready to fully open up their financial system. But there is this other element here, which is political. There are countries in BRICS itself that would not like this to happen. And for me, the best example of this is found in India-Russia trade. After the war started, Indians started buying a lot of oil from Russia, and more fees from it started accumulating in Indian banks. This happened because the trade was done in rupees. The Russians were getting rupees from the Indians for that oil. And these rupees began to accumulate because the rupee is a non-convertible currency. You cannot withdraw it or move it freely out of India. So the Russians faced the problem of having more and more rupees deposited in India, but not being able to move the money out. This story has many different twists and turns, but the important thing is that at some point, the Russians said, maybe let's try some other currency then, the Chinese yuan, which is actually the most abundant in the markets and is ultimately much easier to exchange. And here, the Indians said no. That is, India, for political reasons, did not want to settle accounts in the yuan. The yuan, which is actually the only hope for de-dollarization under BRICS. Here, in my opinion, this political element shows how big the limitations of this grouping are. It wants to show the West that it can debate about the world without it. But when it comes to concrete discussions about what that world would look like, it's incredibly complicated. The topic of the alternative payment system was raised at the recent BRICS summit in Kazan in Russia in 2024. However, the discussion on the topic ended in failure. The summit did not provide any binding agreements. Despite this, it was still a PR and propaganda success for Russia. Nearly 30 government delegations came to Russia, as well as the UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres. What we can also see as a success for Russia is introducing a new partner country status, which will allow the BRICS group to increase its political weight while not admitting new full members. The admission of new full member states is still the subject of internal debates within the group. BRICS has its member states, but also its partner countries. Among them is one NATO member, Turkey. Turkey has been seeking full membership in BRICS for a long time. It has currently been granted partner country status. I would say that Turkey's goals can be divided into three different categories when it comes to BRICS. First and foremost, Ankara is keen to promote its own interests. One of the key areas of this rivalry, cooperation between China and Russia, the main members of BRICS, is precisely in Central Asia and Africa, where Turkey is actively and vigorously developing its economic and political ties. And it is precisely this BRICS format that would be an ideal forum to promote these Turkish interests in line with Russian and Chinese objectives, so as not to lead to unnecessary escalations. The second objective, one could say the main advantage for Turkey in terms of the format of BRICS meetings, is first and foremost the chance to meet the leaders of all these members in one place, and above all, on a routine basis. What Turkey lacks most in its relations with China, for example, is that they are currently only conducted in a bilateral format, i.e. when such a meeting is needed. So there is a lack of routine where once a year Ankara could have a chance to meet and talk about important things that concern precisely the regions of cooperation as well as rivalries in the BRICS area. Finally, the third element is a long-standing goal in Turkish politics, namely to present the country as a representative of the Global South. Turkey hopes that by joining BRICS, it will be able to present itself not just as a Western country, but as a Western country that actively participates in Eastern formats, where Russia and China are located, so countries alternative to Western interests. Turkey could sell this as an opportunity to balance its interests and policies between these two blocs, presenting itself as an in-between option. In contrast, Turkey's desire to join BRICS should not be perceived as an attempt to disengage from the West. For Turkey, the West is first and foremost still a major political and trading partner, and BRICS should not be expected to replace these alliances for any purpose. Rather, it is purely and simply expanding the room for maneuver for Turkey's politics and economy. There is an ongoing debate in BRICS about whether to expand the organization. One of the key BRICS countries, namely China, is in favor of this solution.
Chińczycy tak się widzą właśnie w tej organizacji jako taki,
That's how the Chinese see themselves in this organization, as a focal point around which the whole organization is supposed to revolve. And for this reason, the Chinese are very much in favor of, for example, the expansion of BRICS. When it was a group of 5 major developing countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS had the appearance of 5 equal partners, whereas today, as it's growing in terms of numbers, it's becoming more and more diluted in that format, giving the Chinese the kind of major player position that they would certainly like to have there. They are leaving some semblance of it being a gathering of equals, and this is particularly visible in relation to Russia. The Chinese are somewhat aware, especially after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, that they are somehow creating the conditions for Russia in general to have contacts with the non-Western world. We had the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing in 2023, with dozens of leaders of non-Western countries. Xi Jinping opened it and gave Putin the opportunity to also give the opening lecture. This kind of creates the conditions for Russia in China-dominated formats, to have contacts with the rest of the world. Although, of course, after that, in practice, things are much more complex. All these players are trying to build bilateral relations a little independently of each other. Also the Chinese themselves, although, as I said, they have a lot of other forums in which they can develop cooperation, for example, with Latin America or Africa. Beijing is very keen to show that there are international forums with serious, powerful countries that are all skeptical of the West, critical of the West, and above all, of the United States. For the Chinese, BRICS is supposed to be an alternative to the G20, certainly to the G7, that main forum where the West meets, and they want to have a similar feeling around BRICS. Although it has to be said that it is only one format in a broad catalog of this type of format, because the Chinese, of course, have Belt and Road forums, they have plenty of various initiatives of their own. This one is also useful for them, because at least there is a promise in BRICS to somehow institutionalize this non-Western cooperation. I mean, it's this sort of loose association of countries dissatisfied with the West, which is increasingly talking about concrete steps that they could take, particularly in the monetary and economic field. And I think that for the Chinese, this is also an important element, as far as we can see, because it's not a simple format. There are a lot of divergent interests there. There are a lot of countries in that format that are openly skeptical or even hostile towards China, like India. So, there are limits to what can be achieved there. But the Chinese would certainly like to institutionalize it a bit more. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, why not take a look at our other stories from the region? On screen now.